Thanks everyone for joining us today for our March co-op conversation. I don't know how it's already March. My name is Natalie Kellio, and if you don't know me, I'm the Professional Research Associate with the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. And I'm your host and moderator today for this timely and frankly exciting conversation with Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nembhard. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Treaty 6 territory, traditional land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota for millennia, and homeland of the Métis. We are grateful for the opportunity to work on this land and acknowledge that as we meet, share, and learn from each other here today as partners, allies, and friends, we are all treaty people, and we reaffirm our commitment to this hard, shared, and necessary work of reconciliation. The spirit of that infuses our approach to today's timely co-op conversation, continuing February's Black History Month theme of Ours to Tell into American Women's History Month and the lead up to International Women's Day on March 8th. So Black women have always been integral movers and shakers in the co-op movement, often organizing, managing, and laboring in the background without the glory or formal recognition they deserve. Today's conversation is an opportunity to learn about some of the stories, successes, and sacrifices made by Black women in the cooperative sector, and to celebrate their massive contributions while engaging in some open dialogue about the intersections of race and gender in the co-op world. I am humbled and honored to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nembhard is, among many things, a professor of community justice and social economic development in the Department of Africana Studies and director of the McNair Post-Baccalaureate Achievement Program at the John Jay College at the City University of New York. She is also one of our esteemed research fellows here at the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives. Jessica's program of research focuses on community economic development, solidarity economics, cooperative economics, Black political economy, and popular economic literacy. Her research and numerous publications investigate problematics and alternative solutions in community economics, worker ownership, racial wealth inequality, community-based asset building, community-based approaches to justice, and the benefits and impacts of cooperatives on communities, especially Black, American, and racialized communities. She has won numerous awards. Recently, the Association for Social Economics 2022 Thomas F. Devine Award for Lifetime Contributions to Social Economics, the 2022 Distinguished Faculty Award from the John Jay Alumni Association, and the Association of Cooperative Educators 2021 Award for Outstanding Contributions to the Cooperative Education and Training, an award that, since 2022, has been named for her. So before we begin from Jessica, just a note on logistics. So this is our co-op conversation series. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, Jessica will present a formal presentation, and then she and I will have a short conversation, and then we will break out into rooms so that you can discuss a question that Jessica is going to pose to you. And it also is an opportunity to get together and meet each other and have some collaboration in the co-op sector right here. One of the things we hear repeatedly in our conversations with cooperatives is they value these opportunities to network. These breakouts are meant to make that happen, to be enriching to you as individuals, but also your capacity as organizations, and get our creative juices flowing as a sector. If anyone is experiencing technical difficulties, you can message Stan Yu directly in the chat. Stan, please wave to everyone so that we know who you are.
Hi, everyone.
And Stan will be able to help. We will be recording this session, and the link will be shared with everyone who registered for this event. All of that will be emailed to you after today's talk, once Stan cleans it up and gets it ready to go. Without further ado, Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure. I was just saying before we started how much I miss my visits up to Saskatoon and to hang out with all of you. And actually, most of you are new. I don't even know everybody anymore. But anyway, hi to the old friends and hi to new friends. I'm looking forward to this discussion. Let me share my screen. So I will be talking about African American women in the U.S. co-op movement. As we said, you know, expanding Black History Month into Women's History Month. And I also would like to do my land acknowledgement and acknowledge the original occupants and stewards of the land, as was already done, and recognizing that we live under settler colonialism as well as racial gendered capitalism. I want to acknowledge our ancestors, especially my ancestors, recognize our elders, acknowledge the struggles of enslaved laborers, all those who labor without just compensation, continuing to do that, those who are combating anti-Blackness and patriarchy, and acknowledge, even more importantly, not just the history of struggle, but the history of resistance and the ways that we all have used mutual aid and cooperation, cooperatives for liberation. So thanks for having me. Years ago, when I started thinking about the roles of women in co-ops, I came across a study by one of the Japanese consumer co-ops. I think this is from the 80s, but I'm pretty sure it's still an issue. And they said women are members and men are directors of co-ops. And actually they were questioning it. So it wasn't just a statement or an observation, but it was also a question, why, right? Why are women members and men the directors? And so I kind of took that as a way to try to think about, right, what are women's roles in cooperatives? And I've mostly focused my research on African Americans in cooperatives. So I was looking especially at the roles of Black women. So I was looking, you know, what are Black women's essential challenges? And then why co-ops or how co-ops, and then are women, especially Black women in co-ops, more or less just members, or do they have some leadership roles? So of course we know that women in general, Black women in particular, are very much responsible for family survival. They're very much integrated into their communities and end up doing both community care work as well as family care work. But financially, right, until the 1970s and sometimes even later, women couldn't access credit on their own, especially if they were married. You had to have a signature. I guess Canada might have been similar, but in the US, you had to have a signature of your husband if you were married before you could even get a loan, take out a loan. We were left out of a lot of the decision-making and power positions. We were, the power that we did hold was very invisible. And so we were not recognized as leaders or even founders or decision makers. So I went into my research looking at Black women in the co-op movement from that perspective, but found a very different history once I started focusing on it. I found that African American women were actually an integral part of the U.S. Black cooperative movement, similar to their roles in the Black church and mutual aid societies and the civil rights movements, right? They were usually organizing, managing in the background, doing a lot of the scud work, but not really getting a lot of the glory or the formal recognition. One of my favorite examples, or I guess favorite is not the right word because it's not a great thing to recognize, but I look at Ella Jo Baker, who in a minute you'll hear was actually very active in the Black co-op movement in the 1930s, but in the 50s and 60s, she was very active in the civil rights movement. She's actually, most people don't realize this, she was actually a co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Council and its executive director, but she was totally overshadowed by Martin Luther King Jr., who was also a co-founder and who was the president and the face of the organization. So when we think of that organization, we only think about Black male ministers. We don't think about the fact that a very strong Black woman was its co-founder and its executive director for at least 5 or 6 years. And so that's what I mean by doing much of the background work without the glory. But as I said, when I started looking at Black co-ops, I found something different. So one example is Consumer Cooperative Trading Company in Gary, Indiana, that started in 1932. it was actually one of the Black male founders who wrote this in an article he wrote about their beginnings. And he actually credited two things, their education program and the strength of the Black women in their movement. And he said the Women's Guild was really the one that kept the co-op going. We invigorated the co-op movement in Gary, Indiana, where this co-op was, helped to increase the membership when it was floundering, started the study groups, helped the study groups to keep going, and really kept everything going. So when he writes about the success, and this cooperative society created 2 cooperative education courses in the night school at the local high school for the adult program in the local high school. They started a buying club, which became a grocery co-op. They started a credit union. They also had a gas station co-op and then a second grocery co-op. So a pretty successful program in the height of the Great Depression. But when he talks about it, he says, if it wasn't for our education program, that we had a study group and these courses, and if it wasn't for the Women's Guild, we would not have achieved everything we achieved. So just to give you a quick example of why I'm saying I found things a little different than I expected in the history of the Black co-op movement. So we found that Black women were not just members, but also founders, managers, directors of cooperative enterprises and cooperative economic activity. I have a whole list of co-ops that were either run by or were predominantly or all Black women. I'm not going to be able to go over all of them, but in a minute, I'll tell you a little about some of them. But the gist is, right, that it was evident in their leadership in mutual aid societies first, as well as in cooperative economic projects, education, development. And we even see it now in contemporary worker co-ops in the United States. Most of the growth in worker co-ops in the last 15 to 20 years has been women of color, especially immigrant women. So again, a really interesting phenomenon. So the questions, as I said, I've been looking at, why do Black women have this different kind of co-op experience? Why are immigrant women of color leading the development of new worker co-ops, at least in the US, and maybe Canada's having this similar? And then what are the continuing challenges? I think when I finish, we'll focus you guys on what are the continuing challenges, but also if you've got any insights or want to talk about my other 2 questions. And you'll see I have answers, sort of, but I'm still kind of exploring what these would look like. One of my answers is that we know that Black women were very strong in the mutual aid movement, the Black mutual aid movement in the United States from the 1700s. I think probably because so much of the mutual aid was about community caring, right? Taking care of families, communities, people in communities. And we know that women tend to be the ones who do that. So for Black women, they established day nurseries, orphanages, homes for the aged, infirmed, etc. They pooled their resources to create mutual aid societies. These were even the poorest of women could contribute. And so there was no hierarchy of who was involved in these things. And the women got experience working together, working with pooled resources and solving community problems through cooperative, collective activity. And so it kind of was natural that they would then move into the co-op movement. So they were providing these vital social needs, asserting leadership. We know those who study the mutual aid movement in the US, the Black mutual aid movement, have found that 60 to 75% of the mutual aid societies were owned and run by women. And so you can see that seemed like there was a natural integral transition into the co-op movement from having been involved in this. And we know some of the Black women leaders that I talk about actually did start out in mutual aid movements. So I'm going to skip the Combahee River colony, but that was early during the Civil War. Black women took over land that they, after the Union Army ran out the Confederates. So that was an interesting story of Black women's leadership in collective ownership and work. The Ex-Slave Pension Society from 1896 was actually our first reparations organization, but it was also a mutual aid society. And so again, that was founded and run by a woman named Callie House. And so you've got those kinds of examples. You've got the Independent Order of St. Luke with Maggie Lena Walker. Again, starting in the late 1890s, but moving into the 1900s, creating a mutual bank, a department store, affordable housing, all run by a Black woman board and a Black woman. So again, crossing between mutual aid societies, mutual insurance and banking and that kind of thing, and then into full-fledged co-ops. Walker talked about how important it was for women's roles to be economically and politically involved, right? And that, you know, communities, the race, and even Black men couldn't achieve their full potential without women. And that women needed to band together, right, to pool their resources and pool their energies, and that was what was going to make a difference. So you'll see that's kind of a theme here. I mentioned Ella Jo Baker earlier from the 1950s and 60s, but in the 1930s, she was a co-founder again and executive director of the Young Negroes Cooperative League. So again, during the Great Depression, right, pulling young Blacks together. This time they were very, she and George Schuyler pulled the groups together. They were very strong about how important it was for young people and women to run the organization and to run an organization that was going to, quote, save the race by using economic cooperatives and being engaged in cooperative economics. They had a really interesting 5-year plan to create an ecosystem. But also when you look back at Ella Baker's career, it really started in the co-op movement. So her leadership started with her leadership in co-ops in the 30s, right? And that's where I argue that she developed her notions of grassroots organizing, democratic leadership, economic justice, the importance of Black youth running things that she then gets better known for in the 60s when she also helps to form SNCC and support young Blacks in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I'm happy to say that we just last year got her inducted into the U.S. Co-op Hall of Fame under a new category called Unsung Heroes, which was actually created because of some of my research. And there's a picture of Ella Baker. I'm going to skip through Cooperative Industries of DC, but people can ask me about that if they want. It was actually one of our early multi-stakeholder co-ops using unemployed Black women and homemakers, first making mattresses and canning. Oh, I said I was going to skip it, didn't I? Anyway. And then they ended up doing agricultural marketing also. Burroughs, again, was really interested in making sure that women could have more control over work, right? Better jobs in domestic service with higher salaries, better quality jobs, better quality of life. And Halena Wilson worked with the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and they started credit unions and buying clubs. And also she did a lot with study circles and having women learn about consumer economics, cooperatives, and why we need credit unions and other kinds of economic financial cooperation, as well as consumer cooperation, especially to make sure they were a union, right? To make sure the union wages got recirculated more in the community and were able to be used by Black communities more. We also got Wilson. She's going to be this year's Co-op Hall of Fame Unsung Hero. So again, we're starting to get more Black women recognized. And she also has a beautiful quote about, again, the race, Black people needing to pool their resources and unite their forces for the common good to make a difference. Freedom Quilting Bee quilters who were sharecroppers in the 60s and 70s, learning that through a co-op they could control their work better, make extra income, get themselves out of sharecropping debt, but also provide services to the community like childcare and school programs, because now they're working outside the home and they themselves needed childcare and stuff, but they also made sure the whole community had it. Skip Fannie Lou Hamer, but another great story of agriculture and land ownership. Workers own sewing companies, 90s, 80s, and 90s, women owning their own sewing factory, Cooperative Home Care Associates is the largest worker cooperative in the United States, and it's mostly women of color doing home care and nursing. Another great story about starting with very low wage, unskilled contingent work and providing, full-time work with career ladder support, retirement funds, full benefits, that kind of thing. And then there's Ujima Marketplace about women entrepreneurs being able to have a collective cooperative market space safe for them to work. So to sum up, right? And then contemporary worker co-ops, we know that, again, as I said, most of the fastest growing worker co-ops in the United States now are led by and owned by women of color. They're leading their sectors and changing the nature of work, increasing the returns to work, providing livable wages with multiple benefits, both economic and non-economic benefits, which we can talk about, and actually engaging in economic democracy and providing leadership. The U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops is now, the board is mostly people of color and mostly women of color. So again, lots of interesting stuff happening with women of color in the worker co-op movement. And so what are the co-op benefits, especially for women, right? Again, they change the nature of work for women, allow us to have that work-life balance and to provide collective space that's family friendly, increases the returns to work, enabling us to share supplies, marketing, customers, provide living wage jobs, profit sharing that we control, right? And then stability and leadership for women. And that leadership spills over into other aspects of their life, which is a whole nother place we could go. But I'm not going there. So I'll hand it back to you guys so that we can have dialogue about the continuing challenges and what kinds of things I've been learning. But I think if I had to take one word to sum up what I've learned about women's roles in co-ops, it would be transformation, right? These are very transformational roles, both economically and socially, and sometimes even politically. Thank you. Did I go too fast now, or was that good?
Perfect, Justin. Thank you so much. We're going to get to the breakouts where you're all going to get together and discuss Justin's question to you. But I'm going to start with a short conversation with you based on what I've just heard and a few questions to get the ball rolling. So transformation is something that was coming up in my mind, and I couldn't articulate it because I was trying to write a question. So I'm thinking about Black women and girls. Whenever I think of International Women's Day, which is next Wednesday, I'm always thinking about, like, how can we better support girls to thrive? Because we want girls and Black girls to be doing this transformational change to make our world a better place. So what can we do as, like, we have a wide array of people involved in the co-op sector here, and what can we do to help support that next generation of women, particularly Black women, Indigenous women, to grasp onto this cooperative movement to make the change that we know that they can make. So sorry if that wasn't very articulate.
No, it was a great question. I'm excited to answer it. Thanks. And yeah, I also always remember Women's Day, International Women's Day, because it was my mom's birthday, and this year she would have been 99. So yeah. I think for young women and girls, the two most important things are, one, for them to see us in co-ops, and for us to help them to create co-ops from early on. I really believe in youth co-ops, and especially, since we're talking about women's empowerment, youth co-ops where young women can start and run their own co-ops. I think it's a really incredible experience, kind of low stake co-op activity to start with, so they can learn the power of a co-op. They can learn how to be a good member of a co-op. what co-op shared leadership means, how to make joint decisions with people. So by the time they're adults, they're already used to that model. They recognize its strengths. They know how to contribute to it. And they've already, kind of had a learning curve, right? So I think we should be, at least from middle school, and I don't, I could see it even starting in elementary school. We need to start getting our young girls and actually all our youth involved in starting co-ops, right? Especially thinking about an issue or a problem or a concern that they have in their community or at their school and trying to use a co-op to address that concern, right? Those usually make a lot of connections, and a lot of the youth co-ops that I've studied, that's what they were responding to, some kind of issue in their community, and then they were using a co-op to help address it. But the co-op also then helped them to develop leadership, to learn math better, to learn communication skills better, that agency, right? Especially for girls, I think being in a co-op gives you that sense of agency, right? And when you recognize that you have something to contribute, that people will listen to you and that you can work in a team, right? That leadership doesn't have to be just some charismatic man out there who's taking over and being dictatorial, right? That leadership is about work, how you develop other leaders and how you work together with other people and make joint decisions. So teaching that early on, I think, can be really important. And then, my second one or my first one was if they see us doing these things also, I think that makes a huge difference. So, even one of the things I noticed when I was doing my research about the history of Black co-ops, one of the mistakes that the Black community made was, and sometimes they were hiding their activity from their children, and they didn't do it on purpose. They did it a lot of times because for Black Americans, it was often actually dangerous to participate in co-op activity. So they were hiding it, doing it under the radar so they wouldn't get lynched or they wouldn't get retaliated against for being involved in a co-op, but that meant their children didn't see it. So when I first started talking about this in the 90s, so many people were telling me, oh, Black people don't do that. But then when I started telling the stories without the terminology, they suddenly realized, oh yeah, my grandparents actually were a part of a co-op store, or my aunt and uncle were doing co-op farming or whatever. So once they heard it as a story, they could connect it. But if they heard the word co-op or whatever, no, because, right, you didn't talk about it like that because it was too dangerous. So I think now it's not so dangerous anymore. We need, our children need to see us doing it. I have to, I'll brag about my two children, especially my daughter. I used to take them to a lot of stuff. I took them to a lot of the Association for Cooperative Educators study tours and conferences. And so they both know. My daughter actually ended up helping to co-found a housing co-op in college. And she's worked with me on a couple of writing projects I'm doing because she's doing victimology and is interested in using co-ops in the criminal justice system. And so, and part of it is because they just saw it as kind of a natural part. This is what adults do, right? And it's not stupid or different. And so I think both getting them to do their own stuff, but also having them see what we do, participate in what we do, come to some of the meetings, not be afraid to drag them to an annual meeting or whatever, right? They need to see us doing it. And then both, if they do it more, we'll be more involved with them in their co-op, but also have them be more involved in our co-op activity.
That's great. I have all kinds of ideas for things that we should talk about, hopefully, and research about the intersection of race and gender. And I don't want to get ahead of myself because I want to leave some time for people to get into groups and have these discussions. So I think now I would like Stan to help put you into breakout rooms so that you have the opportunity to network and meet each other. If you could just introduce yourselves and say a little bit about like how you came to this or what your involvement is in the sector. And then Stan's going to, oh, there he is. The question to you is, what are the continuing challenges for women in co-ops? And if you have a perspective on the challenges of Black women and immigrants in cooperatives, please feel free to share that as well. So I will leave you to it, and Stan will give you a warning when it's time to come back, and then we'll reconvene here. I hope everyone's mind is running as quickly as mine is after these discussions and Jessica's talk. And I'm just kind of really excited about all of these things. Did anyone have any, Marc-Andre or anyone have any words before we start the wrapping up?
I think we can open it up to questions, Natalie, if anyone has a question.
That would be great.
Yeah.
So just raise your hand and ask a question or put it in the chat. I think is we usually do things.
Yeah, I see Ramona has a question there, Natalie, just if you want to throw it that way.
Is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Ramona.
Jessica, and thank you for that presentation. I have lots of questions. I'm going to stick to one. And this is more about the sentiment in our community, a little bit of background. My grandfather was a pastor, and his church is actually an extension of a church in the U.S. in Buffalo. So I have quite a connection to sort of the U.S. church and how we would support each other in the Baptist church. But what I wanted to talk about was this issue or this idea that Black people actually cannot work together, right? Like this is sort of this pervasive assumption that we can't work together to create something because we don't want to support each other. And what you sometimes hear as you're growing up is that it's other communities that are able to pool their resources to create opportunities, but it's Black people who cannot do it because we have some type of innate discontent when somebody else performs better than you. And I wonder if that is rooted in slavery and competition and a lot of those things. I was wondering if you could speak to that, because that growing up, you know, in the Baptist church, but also with my parents having one of the larger Black businesses in southwestern Ontario, I interacted with a lot of Black people, and this was a very common sentiment that we would hear.
Yeah, good question. What I found in my research was, first of all, just the opposite, right? That there's this long, strong history of Black folks cooperating using solidarity economics, economic cooperation, actual co-ops, that kind of thing. But as I said, one of the things was it was safer not to talk about it. So you didn't focus on it. And because, you know, capitalism, capitalist competition and exploitation is so pervasive, right? It's also what we all kind of aspire to, right? I once sat at a table at a conference with a guy who was a Black banker, and he was asking about my work, and I was explaining to him about the co-ops and stuff, and he was like, oh, I would never do that, right? I make millions of dollars and I do it on my own and that kind of stuff. So I said to him, well, actually, you're not one of the people I'm worried about. Right? I was like, so, you know, maybe a co-op isn't for you. I'm not trying to force you to be in a co-op, but I'm talking about the people who, if they pool their $5 with somebody else's $5 and 10 of them have $50, they can, you know, they can buy the milk and cheese that they need, that kind of thing. So, one, just reminding people, right, how pervasive capitalism is, and that we often think that we can't, that it doesn't work, right? The other narrative is that our co-ops failed because we couldn't work together. We couldn't run our own businesses and we couldn't work together. And what I also found in my research was most of the co-ops that failed because of white supremacist terrorism and sabotage. Right? So it wasn't even what Black folks did or didn't do. It was outside forces that killed our co-ops. But again, we were afraid to say that. We were afraid to tell that story. So instead, the story got turned internally, that we couldn't do it, that we weren't good enough, that we weren't the right kind of people, whatever. But if you go back, as I said, and look at the, you know, tell the stories of the co-ops that I found, of the cooperation I saw, if you go back and look at what early African civilization societies were, it was all about cooperation, collectivism, working for the common good. It just got, right, the noise of capitalism and the abuses of capitalism overshadowed. And so that's why I think, again, we have to be able to communicate, we have to be able to tell the story honestly and communicate and talk about the fact that, as I said, most of the failures were really not that Black folks didn't do it right. We were undermined and damaged by the greater society that didn't want us to succeed, because if we showed we succeeded, then we would show that their capitalism wasn't working or wasn't needed, and they couldn't afford that.
Great. Thanks, Ramona and Jessica. I see two hands, William and Isabel. We'll start with William and hopefully we'll also get to you, Isabel.
Thank you. Jessica, I put my hand up before you just made your comments and you've answered them, but I would just echo what you said. I really, and I'm calling from or zooming in from St. Paul, Minnesota. I have hopes for the judicial process and the political legislative process, though we have major problems here in the US and a lot of countries do. But I've always believed that education can solve a lot of problems. And I think what you just added to it, education with really, really good communications is really critical. We have to tell our stories. And in fact, I would compliment everyone involved in this program today of being able to do virtual learning along with, the obvious desire that many of us have to be able to do it in person. But thank you very much.
Thanks, William, and thanks for all you do.
Okay, Isabel, last question.
Oh,
you're muted.
Just very quickly, and it picks up on, hi Jessica, it picks up on William's point too, that my question is that is it not, it's no coincidence that co-ops start with education, that in all the stories you shared, people started around the table or wherever to educate themselves, because one of the biggest challenges remains an education system that teaches us what to see and what to value and how to understand responsibilities. So that was it. Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, and I usually talk more about it, but we got to talk about it a little bit with how to educate our young people, right, to even be involved in it. But yeah, most of the co-ops I found out any information about started with some kind of study group. The stronger co-ops continued studying together and continued that, training and orientation. And I don't mean official education studying. I'm talking about, sitting in a room and sharing information, teaching each other things, learning from each other's experience and learning by doing. And so that part of the education has been essential. And again, I did try to start out with that example where the Black Women's Guild was the one that kept that education going and held things together. So again, that role for Black women in particular, but I think anybody can have that role. And then also, what William said, what I've been saying too, it's not just the technical education. It's not just how to run a co-op, how to be a mutual, how to do the business, but that education, information about our past, our history, what we've gone through, that kind of thing, right? Because we have to, right, there's so much miseducation. We have to re-educate both against or anti the capitalist stuff, but also about just our histories and legacies. Because I do find that most people, when they realize there is a legacy of this and a history of this and how people have done it before, that's almost more motivating than the economic stability that they can gain and the skills that they can gain from being in a co-op. Just that, that notion that we can do it, we've done it before, we can do it again, we can do it better, seems so liberating and hopeful to people who often just have no hope at all. I mean, I think that's the other issue we're struggling with, people who are so hopeless because of the systems we live under and the kinds of oppressions we all live under, that seeing that there is hope, that there are viable ways to do this, that people that look like us have done things like that in the past, that we're learning more and more, and that we can learn those lessons and do even better. That's what I mean when I talk about that we can use economics as a liberating force. So it's not just that we have used co-ops and solidarity for resistance, but also we can make it a liberating force, both for women, for people of color, for people with disabilities, people who are actually all of us who are under the yoke of capitalism, right, need liberating as far as I'm concerned. And so that's what gives me hope, but I think also that's the message that these stories I'm able to tell give to other people. right? That we can figure out a way that economics doesn't have to be exploitative and oppressive. It can be liberating, and it can be liberating because we can do it together in ways that empowers all of us and make sure that we're addressing our needs, our community's needs, and developing ourselves as human beings.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. I can't wait for you to come to Saskatoon. We'll have to start figuring that out. And thanks to everyone for participating in this insightful talk today. So in a not long, sorry, Stan will be sharing the video link to this on YouTube. If anyone has any further questions, please just send them to us at the center and we will make sure that Jessica gets them. So just a couple of announcements. Our next co-op conversation is on April 5th, 2023, with Marc-Andre and Stan, Research and Communications Coordinator at the CCSC and our Executive Director, to present the findings from our annual Top Co-op Issues Survey. So we'll find out what people are thinking and putting at the very top of their list. So we do this every year, and we poll co-op and credit unions across Canada and ask what the top issues facing them are, and then present the results and share them and get some conversations going about that. And you may also be interested in our new Creating a League of Our Own, a renewable energy cooperatives in Canada discussion series. It's very exciting. So this series is new, and it explores how renewable energy cooperatives in Canada can scale and make a more timely and meaningful contribution to Canada's efforts to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So the next installment is on Wednesday, March 15th. Dan, I don't have a time there. But the talk is entitled Lessons from Europe, the Role of Renewable Energy Cooperatives Federation, featuring Dick Van Sintjan, and I do apologize for butchering that name. Stan is going to post the link so you can check it out for more information. And again, if you have any questions for us or you would like to share something, please email us at the center or visit our website. Thank you so much. It is 1 o'clock on the nose, and it's just been a pleasure being here with all of you today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure too. Thank you.